Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I don't want to talk about a book that I read this year, but rather I want to talk about 20 books that I plan to read in 2022. This is sort of a TBR for 2022. I made one of these last year for 2021, and I think it was a much longer list, but the big problem with it was that I wasn't very specific in what I wanted to read, I think. And although I feel like I got a lot of the books on the list that I wanted to read or reread, I missed some things just because I wasn't too specific. I kept saying, I want to read a book by John Steinbeck, or I want to read a book by this author, or about this sort of thing. And that's not really specific. I function better with clear a clear indicator of who I should read. And so I think I did that with this list, which I think is much more helpful. There were some books I wanted to get to last year that I didn't read but are showing up on this year. And last year, my goal was to read 60 books. I accomplished that, I believe, according to my Goodreads profile. But this year, I want to make it 75 books. I feel like a large part of why I crossed over 60, but I didn't go much further beyond that. And I feel like a lot of that had to do with the fact that I moved, which I've talked about before. And during the month of May and June and part of July, I didn't read as much as I had used to. So I feel like that's not going to be a problem this year, hopefully. I don't want to end up moving to another place too soon. So I figure that's not going to happen, so I'm probably going to read. I'm probably going to make my goal 75 books this year. Hopefully, I manage to accomplish that. And this year, I'm going to actually count the short story collections that I read, whereas before I wasn't doing that, just because I didn't want to add that to my Goodreads list. But I will be sure to do that this year. Anyways, without further ado, let's talk about the 20 books that I want to read in 2022. If you see anything on this list that you like or you want me to possibly consider through the year, I am making a different list entirely, which I'll talk about a little bit later, that I'm keeping on my computer that also might be featured. But yeah, so let's talk about the books. There's no analysis, and we'll move on from there. So the first book on my list is, I said I was going to be specific, and I know what book I want to talk about, but I'm going to say a book by D.H. Lawrence. D.H. Lawrence was a controversial writer in his time, and one of the books that he wrote was especially controversial and has been banned. And I am a sucker for banned books just because I want to know why people have banned them. And it's weird in and of itself that someone would ban a book. And so that fits perfectly with this channel. I'm not going to say it because I want it to be more of a surprise when I do read it in 2022, but expect something or maybe more things from D.H. Lawrence. I am also going to read number 2 is Cannery Row by Steinbeck. I haven't explored Steinbeck much. I thought I was going to read more from him in 2021, but the only thing I read was In Dubious Battle, which I read at the beginning of the year. And I enjoyed In Dubious Battle. Steinbeck is a great author. And I think a lot of the reason I hadn't read so much Steinbeck was because that there was just so much to read that I just didn't get to it. But I'm going to read Cannery Row in 2022. Number 3 on the list is The Tomb of a Tuin by Ursula K. Le Guin, which is the second book in the Wizard of Earthsea series. The first book was phenomenal, and I hope the second book is just as good, so that's on my list. Number 4 is Soldier's Pay by William Faulkner. I did want to get to William Faulkner in 2021. Unfortunately, there was so much to read that I just never got to it. And so I'm going to start, or not start, but I'm going to get to William Faulkner in 2022. And I'm going to read his first novel that was published, which is Soldier's Pay, which I don't hear anyone talking about compared to his other stories that he's written. And that's fine. Like, this might be one of his bad stories. I shouldn't go in thinking that, but that's what I'm thinking. It's also his first novel, and so I really want to get a feel for what how he's progressed. Whereas with Steinbeck, I've gone back and forth, just seeing what he's written over time. I feel like with Faulkner, I have to start with the very first thing he's written to see how he's progressed. Because I've heard a lot of people say, "Oh, you got to read this before you read other things by Faulkner." Codex Cantina mostly, and I think also everyone who reads It Must Converse, Noah, have said that. So, I'm just going to start with the first thing he's written there. I also want to get to Augustus by John Williams. I read Stoner before. Stoner is on my list for the best books of all time. But I'd also like to check out more about what John Williams has read. And I have a feeling it's not going to be the same experience as I did with Stoner, but it should still be a good experience if what he's written manages to hold up in some way. Like if he infuses the same amount of emotion and the same prose, it should be a really solid book and maybe the best of 2022. But we can't predict these kind of things, so who knows. And then number 7 is Mox by John Moxley. John Moxley is a wrestler, one of my favorite wrestlers, and he recently released his autobiography, which a lot of people have said is pretty good, especially because the kind of stories that he tells. He's not the kind of person, like in real life, not in his character. Like, he's not the kind of person to be able to express ideas in the best kind of way, like you would see in people who normally write their autobiography. So I've heard from a lot of people that it has a different vibe to it. So I would definitely like to read Mox and talk about it on this channel. There's not going to be a whole lot, because you can't really analyze a person's life like you can a fiction book, but I think it should still be good. And then number 8 on this list is Demon Theory by Stephen Graham Jones. I've read Stephen Graham Jones here before. The person whose name I forget at the Nerdy Narrative, she particularly likes Stephen Graham Jones, and I found that his writing is interesting, even if I don't understand what he's talking about all the time. The Only Good Indian was something that he published, I think, last year or the year before, and it was a solid book. I really liked the ending with the basketball game that was happening. It felt very spiritual or something like that. Very deal with the devil kind of thing, which I talked about in my video. And Stephen Graham Jones has a unique way of writing and a unique way of writing horror that makes it so appealing. After the People Lights have gone off or something like that, is a horror collection that I talked about in 2019. It's so amazing. Like, it's one of the or maybe I read it in 2020. Yes, that's it. But it's an amazing collection of horror, which I strongly recommend. Even if you don't like horror, it's still fascinating on its own. And so I would like to go back to like 2005, when I think Demon Theory was published, and see what Stephen Graham Jones was writing then. The title of the book has always stood out to me, so I do want to make sure to check out something like that. Number 9 is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. I read Jules Verne before. I would say he's a fascinating writer. I did love Around the World in 80 Days. Of course, this is what the basis for this channel is, because that's a really solid book, Around the Weird, Around the World. And I also read Journey to the Center of the Earth, which was fine. It wasn't anything too special, but Jules Verne has a way of writing wonderment and whatnot, and I do wonder if that carries over to his study of Captain Nemo. So look forward to that in 2022. Number 10 was a hard one to write down on my list, but it's The Old Man of the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. I know a lot of people don't like Hemingway, and I have read a short story by him, and it's just his writing is kind of bizarre, and I've heard so many negative things about Hemingway that it's hard to get into his writing. But I do think I should attempt to read one of his stories, and I guess I'll start with The Old Man of the Sea. It really could have gone with For Whom the Bell Tolls, but I guess it was just the first one that came to my mind. So look forward to that in 2022. I also want to read The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. That was actually a random selection. I looked up the Newbery Medal Award winners, because Holes and that book about the lights, which the name I'm forgetting, Christine Soontornvat wrote it. Christina Soontornvat. But The Girl Who Drank the Moon sounds particularly unusual, about a young teenage girl who finds herself, with a lot of power, a lot of magical power, and what she plans to do with that power, who knows. So I'm excited because it's a Newbery Award winner, and I haven't been steered wrong with those sorts of things. So that's on the list. I also want to read Coraline by Neil Gaiman. I have read a number of Neil Gaiman things before, and if you're a longtime follower of this channel, you know that I'm always on the fence with Neil Gaiman, because some of the stuff he writes is phenomenal and other stuff that he writes is dreadful. Very few times is there a middle-of-the-road experience with Neil Gaiman. But I have heard from Lucas over at the Bits of Lit that Coraline was pretty good, so I'll probably check that out in 2022. As for comics, number 13 is Iron Man Extremists. I haven't read very many Iron Man comics at all, and so one storyline that I am familiar with is the Extremist storyline, which was made into Iron Man 3 in 2011, 2012. It's a pretty interesting storyline, and I look forward to seeing what it was written into comic books. So be on the lookout for that, as well as so many other comics that I want to get to. Number 14 is The Color Purple by Alice Walker. The Color Purple it needs no introduction. So as does Alice Walker, one of the foremost writers of the 21st century, or the 20th century, sorry. So I plan to get to that, especially because I do need more Black literature in my life. Number 15 is The Hobbit by Jrr Tolkien. I read the Lord of the Rings series in the past, and now I want to read The Hobbit. Hopefully it's just as good as the Lord of the Rings series, but I'm probably expecting something different, because it came out before Lord of the Rings, and Tolkien had originally adjusted parts of The Hobbit in order to match what he did in Lord of the Rings, which feels a bit cheap because you're altering your art just so it can fit with some new paradigm you've created. Retconning the past is not good in my opinion. So maybe that's already a point against The Hobbit, but and it carries on with Middle Earth and the lore that Tolkien has already was building up at the time. So I look forward to reading that. I also want to read Flowers for Algernon by an author whose name I forget. Daniel Keyes, I think it is. I'll put it up here. But it's one of my favorite books, and I've read it multiple times, but I have not read it for this channel, and I want to do it because there's a lot to talk about, and it's it's probably one of the better books of the last century, because of the stuff that it deals with, psychology and philosophy and the nature of the human brain, and disability and stuff like that. So worth exploring, in my opinion. And then number 17 is Look Back in Anger. It is a play by an author whose name I forget. Again, I will put it up here. But this is one of the things where I've been looking at. I've been just browsing Wikipedia at random for movies. I've been going from the 30s to 40s to 50s to 60s to 70s, just because that's something I'm interested in. Just seeing how movies have changed over the decades, and I found quite a bit. But that's a story for another channel. But one of the plays that I found while looking through it is Look Back in Anger, which sounds like an interesting title, and the subject matter, the brief synopsis that I heard, was also interesting. So that should be expected from me in 2022. And there's a number of other books that as I've been looking at these movies, finding the books that they're based on, I've been adding them to a bookmark folder on my computer of books to look for. So in addition to this list, there's also that list, which is interesting, and that's also how I found D.H. Lawrence. And so one interesting thing that I found over the years is, a lot of people say there are no more original stories for Hollywood because they're constantly adapting books or comic books or stuff like that. But the thing is, even in the 30s, it was so frequent that they were adapting books, and it was just like every other movie or something like that. So maybe it's the case that Hollywood has never been that original. It's just they've been able to take existing stories and put them on screen and make them more interesting. I don't know. Maybe that's the nature of books and movies, is that they both influence one another. That's something to explore in deeper detail. But that's not what the purpose of this video is. So number 18 is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. You might think that's an unusual book to have on your list, Mr. Nothing. And indeed, that is true. It is an unusual book to have on this list. But it's one that I've never read before, and I'm surprised I haven't read it yet. I've seen plays of Pride and Prejudice, and I was like, this is a bit ridiculous, because Mr. Darby and the woman, they don't necessarily like each other, and it seems like a pretty bad friendship or relationship that's forming. And I've never understood how it's okay that they're together even though they clearly hated each other. But maybe I'm just not good at recognizing character development there. So anyways, that's on my list, and I just want to see how Jane Austen writes these characters, and if they're any better than the interpretations I've seen on screen and stage. The next one is Catch-22 by, I think his name is Joseph Heller. I've read pretty much all of the sort of satirical pieces from the 1900s, such as Animal Farm in 1984, although that's not satire, but that's still sort of criticizing the state of things that we live in, and a whole bunch of other ones too, but I haven't read Catch-22, which Lucas has over at the Bits of Lit, and he tells me that it's pretty good, so I think it's finally time that I should get to it and explore the nature of the military and whatever Joseph Heller is talking about in that story. So look forward to that in 2022. And then the last book on my list, number 20, is All Quiet on the Western Front, which surprisingly, when I was doing that whole Wikipedia looking at movies thing, I found that a surprising number of movies were adaptations of remarks, the author, his books that he's made. He made a surprising number of books about war. You had All Quiet on the Western Front in the 1920s, and he lived well into the 1950s, so he got to write about not only World War I, but also World War II. So imagine how disillusioned with society he was at the end of his life. So that's just something that's interesting to me. So look forward to All Quiet on the Western Front. I read it before, but I would love to read it again. I haven't read it since high school, so maybe there's something new that I can gain from rereading it. So those are the 20 books that I have read or that I plan to read for 2022, along with so many other books that are from the book club that I'm in, or that Lucas will probably tell me that I have to read because he read it and it was really good, much like A Light in the Dark. There we go. See, I finally remembered the name of the book I was talking about earlier. But so all of those and many more. And if you have any recommendations, comment below. I would love to hear from you and find any books that you think might be right up my alley. And other than that, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about these books if they haven't already read them. I think that this list of 20 books is a Mr. Nothing approved list. Worth checking out. It's not the only books I approve, but we'll talk about all of those books at some point. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and 2022 travels. Farewell.